Hello and welcome back to our channel. I'm Crow of A Body and All, and today I'll also be joined by TW, who will probably pop in later. Today we're going to be reacting to the video "It's Time to Revisit Dissociative Identity Disorder" by some guy. This is yet another random white guy with, I presume, no personal experience's opinion on whether DID is real. I say another, both because this happens all the damn time and because if you've been with us for a while, you might remember that we reacted to a pretty similar video by someone called Spoctor a year or two ago. We planned for that to become a VOD on our channel. It did not happen because the VOD, to us reacting of the 30-minute video, ended up being 4 hours long, and also Spoctor didn't censor any of the faces in his video, which meant that we had to hand censor every single name and face, and it ended up crashing the editing software we used at the time, and we could never get the file back, so we gave up. We have not seen this video. We've gotten a bit of a concept of what it's like from people in our Discord server, link below. The only thing that could make this video unique would be it making good points. And I guess we'll see about that, but I do not have high hopes for it based on what I know about it. Another note, why should you trust us? Why are we qualified instead of this random guy? For us, we have a lot of lived experience. We've spoken to a lot of people with dissociative identity disorder, and we live, as evidenced by us calling ourselves we all the time, as multiple people sharing one body. We do not have dissociative identity disorder. We have another disorder on the dissociative spectrum that is unrelated to our plurality or the fact that we share our body. But point being, we've done a lot of personal research, we've talked to a lot of people, and we've also read into a lot of studies, read into the DSM, all that fun stuff. So, let's see.
Dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, has rapidly grown as a visible diagnosis on social media.
In the United States, there are an estimated 4 million people diagnosed with
dissociative identity disorder.
What is it like to live with multiple people in one body?
DID creators on YouTube have millions of subscribers. DID video.
Okay, so I have some thoughts on the DID on YouTube thing, but just to the comment, DID YouTubers have millions of subscribers. It was great of him to put up Dissocia DID for a couple reasons. One, Dissocia DID does not have millions of subscribers. 1.17 million. Two, Dissocia DID is not active. Dissocia DID was basically chased off the internet by the consequences of their actions. But okay, we're gonna keep going.
Videos on TikTok have a combined 5 billion views.
Lord.
And Google search traffic history shows a drastic bump in interest in this diagnosis in the past few years.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, I think that would hold true for most diagnoses. Because the last few years, as outlined on that graph specifically, would have been the beginning of the 2020 quarantine due to coronavirus, which was a time where a lot of people started going to therapy and realizing that something might be up with them, and also developing psychiatric conditions. So, like, that doesn't mean anything.
For mental health professionals like myself, this kind of popularity opens up controversy.
Okay, mental health professionals is intriguing me. What is your specialty? He's a professional clinical counselor, so he's not a dissociative specialist. Let me see if I can find specifically what his practice is and what qualifications are outlined for him. I'm looking into this not because I have more qualifications than the therapist or whatever, but because saying that you're a clinician does not necessarily mean you have authority on what you're specifically talking about. Okay, so looking at Psychology Today, he has training and expertise to handle your mental health issues, and he specifically outlines anxiety, depression, trauma, men's issues, and college-related challenges. Okay, he outlines a number of things. Oh, here we are. Here's his specialties and expertise. PTSD, addiction, and depression. His expertise does not include anything dissociative at all. Most of these are actually directly related to trauma and PTSD and to addiction. Mood disorders, that's depression, ADHD, anxiety, college mental health, that's men's issues, which is really vague. Self-esteem, stress. Yeah. So, oh, I stand corrected. He is, well, he's probably a white Latino. I don't think he's mixed. But okay, he's Hispanic or Latino. So he might actually be white. Never mind. Oh, and he's a CBT therapist. Ayo. To be clear, CBT is a real therapy. It's a valid therapy, and it's helpful for many. But it is very, very common for people, especially with dissociative disorders, to do very poorly in CBT, and for CBT to have pretty negative, like, associations with a lot of trauma survivors. So I'm glad that he's more qualified than Spockter was, the guy I initially reacted to. But he is not a specialist in dissociation by any means. He does not specialize in internal family systems. He doesn't specialize in any sort of, yeah, here we are, person-centered, strength-based, trauma focus. Yeah. So, you know, I'm sure he's a fine therapist, but him being a therapist is not a qualification in specifically this situation, other than the fact that he has an understanding of very general mental health. Psychologists and psychology classes generally skim over DID massively, as most psychologists, especially psychologists with DID, because yes, they exist, will tell you. I've seen many psychologists who actually do specialize in things more close to dissociation, for example, borderline personality disorder specialists, who also had basically no understanding of dissociative disorders, even a little bit. So that is not a source, that's just background. Okay, back to the video.
Is DID being overdiagnosed, or has it been chronically underdiagnosed? Perhaps there's some reason that it's only recently become more common?
You know what happened in 2020? You know, the, like, global traumatization event? You know, the internet? Okay, whatever.
Is it just a trendy fad? How can you tell the difference between a real case and something else? What does the research say about it? Is it even a genuine mental health diagnosis? If it's too controversial, then should we consider eliminating the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder altogether?
Okay. You know, I'm gonna leave it, but this is a weird time to be focused on whether DID is too controversial to be in the DSM. It's pretty well established.
The only way to give a somewhat satisfying answer to all of this is to get into the weeds of the topic and look beyond just the trend, which is
Okay, let's see
exactly
if he gets into
what I
the weeds,
intend
though.
on doing. So,
But he did just officially call it a trend. So, that was sneaky.
stick around, because there's a lot to unpack.
Certainly is, my good sir.
This video was sponsored by Nebula. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is a mental health diagnosis that's often misunderstood and perceived as strange. And that strangeness captivates people's fascination. I mean, the idea of having multiple identities coexist within a single person makes for some great entertainment. That strangeness, though, also introduces some skepticism among the general public and mental health professionals alike. But we'll get to all that later on. If you'll humor me, before we go any further, I think that it's important to start by defining and understanding dissociative identity disorder as it exists as a medical diagnosis today.
Okay, so to limit pausing, I'm just gonna jim the camera like this every time he says something that is kind of like a trope of DID skepticism, or that's just, for lack of a better word, annoying as someone who, you know, lives as being plural. For example, his statement that it's fascinating and cool and strange and weird to be multiple people sharing a body, and that therefore, whatever.
And to do that, we need to go to the source and look at the Mental Health Bible in America, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or...
Okay, this is a really bad sign coming from a professional therapist, but I'm going to assume that this is for the benefit of the audience who are not clinicians, and not that he thinks the DSM is the definitive source on diagnosis, because it's a template, basically. It's functionally a template that describes the official insurance codes.
There are 5 different criteria for diagnosing DID, and a person must meet all 5 in order to receive the diagnosis. They are as follows. First, a disruption of identity, characterized by two or more distinct personality states, which may be described in some cultures as an experience of possession. The disruption in identity involves marked discontinuity in sense of self and sense of agency. These signs and symptoms may be observed by others or reported by the individual. Second, recurrent gaps in the recall of everyday events, important personal information, and/or traumatic events that are inconsistent with ordinary forgetting. Third, the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Fourth, the disturbance is not a normal part of broadly accepted cultural or religious practice. And fifth, the symptoms are not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition, for example, complex partial seizures. So in layman's terms, there's a few things to note in these criteria. The first thing is that the diagnosis requires two or more personality states that are labeled as different identities. Now, this is different from having distinct personalities. In psychology, basically your personality is like the long-term vision of who you are. So it includes a very consistent set of traits and ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Personality states, on the other hand, are more like short-lived moods or behaviors that pop up in specific scenarios.
This man is not a dissociative specialist. I'm sorry. Okay. No, this is not, okay. So, in case we were wondering if this guy specializes in dissociation, here's our answer. No. Apparently he also does not specialize in personality disorders, but whatever. So, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. So, a personality, in both clinically and in its general definition, is a relatively consistent way of thinking, feeling, being, connecting to yourself, your environment, and your sense of identity. This is exactly what is described in Criterion 1 as a personality state. A personality state is not like a mood in basically any way. It is functionally a personality, and that's why it was formerly called multiple personality disorder, and it was not renamed because it was understood that there were not multiple personalities. It was renamed largely to avoid confusion with the class of disorders known as personality disorders, which all end with the phrase personality disorder. MPD was also always considered a dissociative disorder. So the main distinction was just to clarify it, and also to clarify it as an identity-based and dissociation-based disorder.
So, for example, you might be loud, outgoing, and impulsive with your friends, but quiet, reserved, and organized at work.
Those aren't personality states. That's code switching, or just adapting to your environment. One thing of note is that personality states, or what we're now going to be calling alters from here on out, just for the sake of clarity, alters can also experience code switching, or what he describes as personality states. There are alters and headmates and people without DID who will act reserved at work and outgoing with friends, independently of the rest of the people in their body. I am a person like that. I often get very quiet around strangers until I'm confident that I'm allowed to talk. But, for example, TW is just loud in general and mostly code switches in how polite they bothers to be. That's because we're different people, for lack of a less controversial word, and we react to things differently because we have our own personalities.
Personality states are just a snapshot of your current emotions and behaviors in a particular situation.
That's not what that is. Also, personality states in DID are specifically largely characterized by consistency, and by that consistency relating to identity.
So, in dissociative identity disorder, the person only has one personality, not multiple
Debatable.
personalities. But
Debatable.
they might express different personality states and perceive them as separate identities. So I know
Debatable.
that sounds kind of pedantic, but it is an important distinction. People with
It is
DID
pedantic and you're wrong.
don't have multiple people living inside of them. Just one
Debatable.
personality that's been fragmented into these states or identities.
Extremely debatable, like super debatable. Like a ton of studies have gone into how debatable this is. The idea that DID is a result of fragmentation specifically is a subject of massive debate. Leading theories on DID generally will posit not that a single identity was fragmented, but rather that a single identity never formed or never formed completely.
Those fragmented states or identities are called alters because they have an altered way of thinking, behaving, and relating to the world.
That is not why they're called alters. You can't just make up the etymology of a really well documented. You can't just do that. Okay, they're called alters because alter is short for alternate personality state, alternate identity state, alternate identity. They do not have an altered way of perceiving. Alternate is just, well, you know what the word alternate means. It's an alternate to the other alters, or it's an alternate to whoever's considered the host. It is a state of identity, it is a personality, it is a state of being that is alternate to the other ones. Alters may, alter things, but they're not called that because they alter things. They're just, it's a noun that's a shorter version of another noun. It's not a verb.
Alters are often given their own name and can vary in any dimension: age, gender, sexual orientation, temperament, even physical characteristics. In rare cases, some folks might describe one of their identities as an inanimate object, or an animal, or even a fictional character.
None of those are rare, by the way. Those are extremely common. Like, really, really common. Animal alters are extremely common in people who have experienced trauma, especially abuse trauma, relating to animals. I'd say most systems I know have had a headmate or an alter who was an animal or was non-human or was a fictional character or was an inanimate object. I don't remember many systems I know with more than 2-3 alters, if any, that did not have a single non-human or fictional one. So that's, wrong.
They can have different memories, experience separate consciousness, can have different skills and abilities. For example, one identity might exclusively speak a second language that the person learned, while the others are unable.
That last example, I feel like it came from Sybil.
Recognizable. Media may perpetuate this idea that alters are dramatically visible or wear different clothes or have a change in their voice, but
Yes, the fuck we do. Hello, I'm TW. If you didn't notice a change in the voice, honestly, I think that might be a you problem. We also do dress differently. We're dressed the same now because we don't have time to change our clothes. But if you want to see a way I usually dress, over here. If you want to see a way Crow usually dresses, over there. We dress differently because we have different fashion senses, and we want to. We, have opinions on how we look best. I actually don't like these glasses very much. My preferred glasses are sunglasses, and we're indoors, so here we are. There are many systems with dramatically different handmaids and alters. Many will dress differently. Usually how differently you dress is a matter of how many different clothes you have access to, and how open you're able to be. We are pretty open in our day-to-day life, which is why we frequently speak in our own voices. Not every system works that way. There are plenty of systems who have very similar voices or who always dress the same or whatever. But that is not the rule, and many systems, when given the chance, will dress differently.
most of the time, people with DID look and sound the same. Instead, the change in identity happens in terms of their opinions, memories, or demeanor.
That varies. I wouldn't say with so much confidence that there's a way it normally is in terms of what changes.
DID have more subtle identities, to the point that
That's very
they're not
common,
even differentiated enough to give them names. Most people with DID are quite covert in their diagnosis, for example.
That is true.
In any case, the first criteria also describes a loss of a sense of agency, which makes sense. When a person dissociates and changes identities, this is called switching. And when a particular identity is the one that's in control and that's actively engaging with the outside world, people with DID say that that identity is fronting. If you regularly feel as though you're ceding consciousness to another identity, yeah, you wouldn't feel in control. This first criteria also describes how alters interfere with a sense of self. In the DID world, the self we're talking about here is the person's core identity, which is usually their actual personality.
I need to take a walk. So, crash course on interacting with people with DID and plural people in general. Do not use the word core. Most people with DID, and especially most plural people, hate that word. Because that word implies, well, actually, this isn't even an implication, he's outright saying it, but that word implies that there is a real personality that all the other fake personalities are detracting from, are disrupting, are destroying. The DID criteria does not say that there is a main real personality. It does not describe a core personality. It fully allows, actually, for equally real personalities because that's a thing that happens. And many, again, theories, as I believe Crow mentioned, many theories will posit that a lot of time there is no real personality because a real personality never actually formed. Dear God.
Interestingly, the core identity can be different from the host, which is the identity that's most often present and interacting with the world. And a person's system can have as few as 2 total identities, all the way up to 100, or in some very extreme cases, some claim thousands.
Okay. Hi, Crow again. So that's a bit of a red herring. There's we're going to say two main ways that DID systems are numbered. Number one is just kind of like a group of solid identities who present largely as their own people. These systems will usually range from about 2 to, I want to say, like 15 headmates. I believe the most common number is 8 to 11, but that's off the top of my head. Then, in the other sort of main camp of numbering would be the polyfragmented system. These are systems that will have many layers of functioning. They tend to have, it's hard to describe off the top of my head in a very concise way, but polyfragmented systems will tend to have a larger number of headmates. Usually the smallest of polyfragmented systems will end up at around 20 alters, but these can range up into the hundreds of thousands to infinite. Thousands is definitely not the highest number anyone's ever counted, and this also isn't that rare of a representation of DID. It implies the wrong thing. It's disingenuous to frame both sort of ways of numbering as functionally exactly the same, as counting the same thing, because polyfragmented systems typically do not have hundreds of thousands of full, regular, complete people who will interact with the world and will take control of the body and all of that. They have, as the name suggests, fragments, which will generally be less complete, less elaborate, have less sentience, etc. But yeah, there is absolutely no maximum on any of this, and it's not extremely rare to be polyfragmented. It's just kind of a thing that happens.
The average number of alters seems to hover around 10 to 15.
That's the median, by the way. That's not the average, because the average would be somewhere in the hundreds of thousands. But, okay, that's a nitpick, sorry.
Which is essentially amnesia. People with DID often describe having gaps in memory about everyday events, or forgetting who they are, what their name is, where they live, who they're in a relationship with, or they might find objects in their possession that they don't recall buying.
Okay, so the first, we're gonna go through that as in order as I can remember, because I do actually have pretty bad short-term memory. It is very common for people with DID to have possessions that they don't remember or to forget details about themselves. It is not super common for people with DID to forget their significant others, to forget what their house looks like, and all of that. It happens, but it's not super common, and it's weird to act like they happen with similar frequency, because they really don't.
This amnesia can also block memories of impactful moments from their past, or it might cause someone to forget well-rehearsed skills, like how to drive or how to do
The
their
stock
job.
footage is killing me.
The underlying cause of this amnesia is commonly attributed to another identity or alter fronting. That said, it's important to note that not everyone with DID experiences amnesia in the same way or to the same degree. Some folks have different levels of awareness of their alters. Some might be co-conscious and have full knowledge of the actions of another alter.
That's not what co-conscious means. Co-conscious means when someone is doing something with the body, for example, watching this video, and someone else is also conscious, for example, sitting over their shoulder and watching them watch this video to come in with their own critiques, what me and TW are doing right now. People can absolutely forget things that happen while they're co-conscious, and being co-conscious is not the only way to remember things other headmates do. It's not super related to amnesia, though a lot of systems with amnesia between alters specifically, will experience inter inter-alter amnesia between alters who are co-conscious as opposed to when an alter is not co-conscious, to when they're just completely out of front.
Have apparent total separation of consciousness and memories.
That happens, but isn't super common.
Within a system, there can be varying levels of amnesia depending on which alter is fronting.
But also, it is not always alter-based. There are people with DID whose amnesia is entirely just amnesia of past trauma, who can remember everything that everybody else does. That's actually one of the main reasons that a lot of people with DID will not realize they have it for a while, partly because they've experienced misinformation like that says that amnesia is alter-based, and that if you don't, experience some kind of blackout, then there can't be another person taking over. And also because they can largely remember their day-to-day with some gaps as in where they put their keys, what their social security number is, how they bought that one lipstick, if they bought it. It's not always alter-based. It's pretty frequently a mix of the two, actually.
These three criteria are pretty straightforward. DID is a disorder, so if a person experiences multiple identities, but it doesn't cause them distress, and it doesn't negatively affect their life in any significant way, then they don't have DID. Likewise, if the embodiment of another identity is part of an accepted cultural or religious practice, then it's not DID. So a medium at a seance who embodies the spirit of someone who's died does not have DID. Or someone who gets possessed by the Holy Spirit and starts speaking in tongues at a church where this happens a lot does not have DID. And a child...
Although there are exceptions, those people can have DID. It's kind of case by case, but they do not inherently have it. This part is spot on.
A child who acts out different roles of their imaginary friends does not have DID. Likewise, someone who has these symptoms as a result of using substances or some other medical diagnosis does not have DID. So those are the diagnostic criteria of dissociative identity disorder, which gives some good insights, but it only gives a partial glimpse into what it's actually like to live with DID. And for that, I'll refer you down in the description. I've got my list of sources in a Google Doc, and I'll list some YouTube videos of people who discuss their firsthand experiences there if you want to learn more.
I'm going to open the Google Doc in a new tab. Oh, it's a bit.ly. Oh lord, they have a Discord server. We're putting all these links in a new tab so that I remember to check them later.
Generally speaking, DID tends to manifest more frequently in women during their late 20s and early 30s. But if you dig into their childhood, you usually uncover dissociative symptoms starting between the ages of 5 and 10. The exact cause of DID is the beginning of the controversy. You see, there's essentially two main positions regarding the etiology or origin of dissociative identity disorder. The first perspective is the traumatogenic perspective. This model suggests that DID is a coping mechanism in response to overwhelming childhood trauma, most often coming in the form of chronic emotional, physical, or sexual abuse or neglect, although sexual abuse is by far the most common.
I want a source on sexual abuse is by far the most common, because I really don't think it is.
The current theory is that at that young age, children have not fully formed their metacognitive.
So what he's referring to as the current theory is not the current theory. It is a theory that is semi-modern. He's referring to the theory of structural dissociation here.
Abilities, which is essentially your ability to think about your own thinking. Metacognition doesn't develop until around the age of 3. So when young children go through severe trauma, it surpasses their developmental capacity to cope. And so when triggers related to the trauma come up, it's believed that the mind employs dissociation as a defense mechanism in order to detach, compartmentalize, and protect itself from fully reliving the traumatic experience. And it does this by constructing distinct identities that, in theory, give the child some mental distance from the overwhelming distress. In contrast to this traumatogenic explanation, there is the iatrogenic model.
Oh, of course, these are the two. Fucking hell. I should have seen that one coming. So there's more models than that. For the record, there's more models than that have been researched, that have been supported. But this is about to be the model. You'll see why I don't like it in about 30 seconds.
This model suggests that DID is not caused by trauma, but rather by therapists and popular media. The theory behind this model is that patients who are diagnosed with DID do show to be highly hypnotizable, fantasy-prone, and suggestible individuals. And so when they go to see a therapist who believes in things like multiple personalities or repressed memories, those ideas become implanted, and the patient essentially plays the role of someone who has DID after it's been imposed on them. This can also happen simply due to social influences, such as being exposed to discussions of dissociative identity disorder in movies or on social media.
Oh no.
Which would naturally flow into a discussion of TikTok.
Oh no.
But I don't feel like we've earned that conversation quite yet. Historical roots of what we now identify as dissociative identity disorder date back to 1584, long before the dawn of modern psychology and psychotherapy. In a captivating account, Jean Ferry, a 25-year-old French nun, meticulously documented her own exorcism. It's a fascinating case, and it's also an example of how exorcisms were often used to treat many mental illnesses that, at the time, were viewed as possessions by demons. Jumping ahead to 1885, a French patient named Louis Vivet was the first person to be explicitly diagnosed with having multiple personalities. It's thought today that Louis had 3 distinct identities, and no matter how often he was told by those around him about these different identities, they never shared memories, and he couldn't recall what he did in his other states. There are numerous other case studies both before and after Louis Vivet that share similarities with what we now recognize as dissociative identity disorder. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to set aside those cases and delve into more modern history when the concept started to enter public consciousness. Which would bring us to 1954, when the psychological thriller The Bird's Nest was published by the acclaimed author Shirley Jackson. This novel was later turned into a film about 3 years later titled Lizzie. Around that same time, riding the wave of public fascination with multiple personalities that was sparked by The Bird's Nest, 2 opportunistic psychiatrists persuaded Chris Cosner Sizemore, who was a patient of theirs, who was still under their care, to sign away the rights to her life story to 20th Century Fox. These psychiatrists believed that Sizemore had developed multiple personalities due to witnessing 2 deaths in an accident in her childhood. In just a year, they wrote both a book and a screenplay, and in 1957, the best-selling novel and the Oscar-winning film The 3 Faces of Eve were released. The book and film follow the life of a seemingly ordinary housewife, Eve White, who starts experiencing blackouts and losing chunks of time. But this one has a happy ending, with the 3 personalities becoming one through the use of hypnosis, and she lived happily ever after. Needless to say, the concept of multiple personalities was in the air, but public fascination is very different from institutional acceptance. In 1968, the second edition of the DSM was published, and DID doesn't make an appearance because it hadn't been identified as a distinct diagnosis. Instead, The DSM featured a diagnosis called hysterical neurosis dissociative type. It might not look anything like DID today, but you can see the glimmer of recognition in there. However, only 5 short years later, things started to get really wild. In 1973, the nonfiction
Trying to fix our lighting. All right, here we go.
book Sybil hits the shelves
Yeah,
and
here we
becomes
go.
a sensation overnight, selling 6 million copies within a 4-year span and inspiring an award-winning TV movie that was seen by a fifth of all Americans. Its tagline tells you exactly what to expect: the true story of a woman possessed by 16 separate personalities. It follows the therapeutic journey of Sybil Dorsett, which is a pseudonym used to protect the real identity of Shirley Ardell Mason. The book chronicles the psychiatric treatment that she received from Dr. Cornelia Wilbur, which uncovered repressed memories from her childhood, explored her present-day struggles, and detailed the process of integrating her multiple personalities into a unified sense of self. Prior to the release of Sybil, there had been fewer than 100 documented cases of people with multiple personalities, but in the 20 years following Sybil, there
Here
were
we
over
go.
40,000 reported cases of people claiming to also suffer from multiple personalities. Some might argue that Sybil's case, her story, gave language to their own similar experiences and allowed them to seek treatment.
I would argue that. I would also argue that. We would both argue that. Many people would argue that, actually. Many people do argue that. People argue that all the time. Professionals argue that. Plurals argue that. People with DID argue that. The people whose cases actually came to be known after Sybil would tell you that, but sure, let's go.
Others might say that Sybil kicked off a multiple personality epidemic that led many impressionable people to believe that they suffered the same problem. Many believe that the DID symptoms that Shirley Ardell Mason experienced herself were induced by the psychiatrist Dr. Wilbur. And honestly, there are some legit concerns surrounding Dr. Wilbur's practices.
Dr. Wilbur was terrible, but that doesn't necessarily invalidate the experiences of the real-life Sybil of Shirley. And it doesn't invalidate the experiences of people who saw themselves in that.
I could do a whole video on Sybil, honestly, but just to give
Please
you a
don't.
taste of these issues, Dr. Wilbur frequently injected Mason with sodium pentothal,
Yeah.
to the point that Mason actually developed a physical addiction to the drug. Adding to the list of concerns, Sybil was written while Mason was still under Dr. Wilbur's care. Dr. Wilbur would often try to sell paintings that Mason had done in order to financially help her out, and she even offered to help Mason get into medical school and cover both her tuition and living expenses. This enmeshment continued for pretty much the rest of their lives. Mason actually moved into Dr. Wilbur's home to act as her caretaker at the end of her life after she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. According to reports, Dr. Wilbur was the first to tell Mason that she had an interest in multiple personalities, before Mason ever revealed symptoms that aligned with that diagnosis. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but Mason started seeing Dr. Wilbur in 1954, the same year that The Bird's Nest was released. These intertwining dynamics raise some serious ethical questions, and, at least for me, make the case of Sybil essentially useless for understanding DID. Nevertheless, it's undeniable that Sybil left a significant mark. This pop phenomenon stirred so much commotion in the psychotherapy world that when the DSM-3 was published in 1980, it played a pivotal role in the formal inclusion of multiple personality disorder as a recognized diagnosis. And that term, multiple personality disorder, it still gets thrown out a lot, even though the release of the 4th edition of the DSM only 14 years later changed it to what it is today, dissociative identity disorder. And that name change is important. As I talked about earlier in the video, it redirects the focus of the disorder from the notion of having multiple personalities instead to the challenge integrating these identities into a single personality.
Oh, God.
And
Oh, that's the worst way you could have put that. Okay, whoa. So, that's not why the name was changed, and that is not the goal of DID treatment. There are two main paths of recovering from DID. One of them is integration, which is what he said. Another one of them is something known as healthy or functional multiplicity, which has the same effect of relieving the negative symptoms of DID while also allowing alters to live as independent people and continue to be separate people. Fusion down to one person is not the only way to recover from DID, and it's gross to imply that it is.
ever since the DSM-4, the diagnosis hasn't really changed all that much, outside of including memory gaps as a criteria. Given this complex history, it's no wonder that DID has been the source of controversy. On the one hand, there are case studies that predate the diagnosis, which gives credence to the traumatogenic model and validates DID as legitimate.
It's also shitty to imply that the reason that DID is legitimate is the traumatogenic model, which also isn't really what that model's usually called.
Recent research consistently presents compelling evidence. Individuals with DID share a common history of childhood trauma, exhibit similar symptoms, and even show discernible differences in their brain functioning when switching between alters, as shown by brain imaging technology. On the other hand, when DID appears in popular media, there's a sudden surge in both reported cases and research attention, only to see it drop back down later on.
By the way, you could say the same thing about being trans, about being gay, about a lot of religious things, just a lot of things. A lot of the time when something is introduced to people through the media, they realize it resonates with them, and that doesn't make the thing fake.
Likewise, most DID diagnoses are made in North America, and research shows that DID patients are, in fact, much more suggestible compared to the average person, and even compared to other mental illnesses.
Yes, but again, that could be a feature of the disorder and is generally considered to be a feature of the disorder by people who bring that up. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing depending on, like, how much you want to believe people's lived experience, so.
Sybil was the start of one of these bumps, which continued for about 20 years. The combination of the changes to DID in the DSM-4 and the satanic panic of the 1980s and early 90s contributed to the sensationalization of multiple personality disorder. Suddenly, the public was consumed by fear about alleged satanic ritual child abuse committed by evil cults. But by the mid-90s, the satanic panic waned, and the rates of multiple personality disorder sharply declined. The aftermath spawned several psychiatric malpractice lawsuits. For example, there were several against a psychiatrist named Dr. Bennett Braun, who worked at Rush Hospital here in Chicago in the 80s. Patricia Burgess, your average Illinois mom, sought treatment for postpartum depression with Dr. Braun, but later developed 300 separate personalities under his care, which involved hypnosis, drugging, and suggestive techniques. She also came to believe that her parents were cannibals, that she had abused her 2 young children, and that she'd had sex with JFK. The lawsuit was settled in 1993 for $10.6 million. Since that craze, dissociative identity disorder has never really gone out of style in popular media.
Gross. Also, Patricia Burgess, her case is real, her case sucks. Her case also does not prove that DID in general doesn't exist. It proves that psychiatric abuse exists, which we know, and which also happens in other disorders.
Films like Fight Club, Me, Myself, and Irene, and Split, as well as TV shows like Mr. Robot, United States
please,
of Terra,
please.
and more recently Moon Knight.
Oh, leave Moon Knight alone, man. Sorry. I knew as soon as they said TV shows, I was like, oh dear lord, it's gonna be United States of Terra, and then they're gonna compare it to Moon Knight, which is better in every way, by the way. I've been planning to make a video on why Moon Knight fucking rocks, actually. But, Okay, fine, fine. You know what? I will move on from the stray that Moon Knight just caught for no goddamn reason. I'm just gonna move on.
Have used DID as comedic or dramatic plot devices.
That does not go for all of them. I wouldn't say DID is a plot device in most of those, actually, any more than I would say a movie about someone with schizophrenia would be using schizophrenia as a plot device. In Moon Knight, DID is a thing the character has, and it's not actually used to move the plot forward beyond, like, the fact that their personal plot involves reconciling their plurality. United States of Terra, the plot just is about having DID. I don't like United States of Terra, to be clear. I don't think it's great. We were introduced to it by the Alexandrite system, and I'm not sure if I want to thank them for that or not. But saying that uses DID as a dramatic or comedic device is weird. I mean, like, there's jokes involved, but it's because it's a TV show, and sometimes jokes are made.
Even I dabbled in it when I first started learning how to edit videos. One of the first short films I ever made involved someone accidentally learning about DID while reading chess strategy books, and then played against an altar while a mashup of Toxic and Yeah blasted in the background.
All right.
I was a teenager, I don't know. And while I appreciate well-written stories with interesting premises, excluding my own film, it's worth noting that most of these portrayals are inaccurate and often rely on negative stereotypes rather than aiming for a factual representation. I have mixed feelings about that, but I'm not going to get into it any further, so you all can fight about it in the comments. The reality
Don't suggest that people fight about it in the comments. I think maybe you should get into that in your video on if DID is real, but okay.
is that dissociative identity disorder is not a flashy, exciting, or dangerous condition. It's also not a fun, quirky character trait. If you believe the traumatogenic
Unless you're
model,
cool.
DID isn't a choice, but rather the only way that your mind could cope with horrific, unbearable trauma.
Again, there's more than two models than the iatrogenic model and the traumatogenic, which is such a clunky word. That's not, well, that's usually not the word. There are more models than that, and not all DID. It's irresponsible to portray any mental illness as 100% inherent pain and suffering all the time. It's kind of anti-recovery to do that. It portrays recovery as difficult to impossible. It portrays life as the illness, with the illness as something so horrible that many people will avoid diagnosis for it or assume they can't be diagnosed if they're not suffering enough. It's just, and especially because he says that he's looked into content from people with DID, I have to wonder who he was. Oh, okay, well, he was watching Dissociate, DID, Entropy System, and Multiplicity and Me, almost no doubt. But I do still wonder who he was listening to, because so many people with DID and DID advocates really, really, really hate the idea that DID is only there as a response to suffering and is only experienced as extreme suffering.
There's really no evidence that individuals with DID are violent or cunning con artists or
Okay, that is true.
anarchists capable of bombing an entire city skyline.
Anarchists, maybe. Bombing a city skyline, nah.
Instead, these individuals often struggle with daily life, keep to themselves, and prioritize their own self-preservation and safety, both physically and mentally. At least that was the general clinical consensus until TikTok came into play.
Oh,
Recently.
I forgot TikTok was in the thumbnail. Fuck you.
There's been a surge in the number of self-diagnoses of dissociative identity disorder, particularly among kids who are between the ages of 11 and 17 who say they discovered the diagnosis by watching TikTok.
I'm going to break my own
Now,
glasses.
at this point, we could all just do the thing where we bash TikTok because that's what you're supposed to do. How dare these youths try to understand their own messed up minds? But listen, we all do this.
I
But
can't figure out if this is
self-diagnosis
about to be good or
nonetheless
bad.
does bring up questions about the accuracy and legitimacy of DID among so many of these people. On the one hand, it's possible that social media sites like TikTok are giving people with genuine DID diagnoses a way to connect and share their common experiences. It's also very possible that the trendiness of DID on TikTok has led to an increase in the number of people claiming to have DID who are either mistaken, confused, or simply faking it.
Okay, simply faking it. That's where we don't confused and stuff, maybe it's social media. Honestly, I do think a lot of people who claim they have DID are plural and just don't understand that DID requires things like distress or whatever because they've been fed the misinformation, like the traumatogenic model, that if they are plural, they must have DID, and that the only valid plurality is plurality experienced because of trauma in DID. So I do think there's a lot of plural people who misdiagnose themselves as having a dissociative disorder when they're just functionally plural and it's not harming them in any way, shape, or form. Deliberately faking mental health conditions is actually really rare, especially when we're with like DID, where on TikTok people with DID will be relentlessly harassed. Obviously it does happen, but it doesn't happen in the way people think it happens.
First time that TikTok has induced widespread medical issues. Back in 2021, there was a phenomenon known as TikTok tics, in which young people were developing Tourette syndrome-like tics at an alarming rate. It's also been credited with increasing the number of inaccurate ADHD self-diagnoses.
Okay, the TikTok tics thing, stop. The inaccurate ADHD thing is a thing, but... Yeah.
And so, medical professionals and armchair psychologists who think that this is all just a fad point to the exaggerated displays of switching.
Okay, again, please censor these people's faces. They're actual children. They're clearly children, and censor their names.
The glamorization of alters, and the boasting about having DID, and say that these people are simply imitating pop culture representations of the diagnosis.
I wouldn't call it boasting.
Because it doesn't align with the typical clinical presentation. For example, switching most often happens in response to stress and triggers of trauma, not on command as you might find on TikTok. Okay,
sort of. But here's the thing. Actually, the one on the far left, which I'm going to be censoring, was actually used in the Spockter video. And one thing that I said while reacting to it, and that some people in my chat pointed out, is that a lot of the time you can feel a switch coming on. Switch headaches, when your head hurts because you need to switch, are pretty common. It's pretty common to be able to tell when you're starting to dissociate. People can intentionally trigger themselves and trigger switches, and sometimes these triggers are, self-harming ones, but sometimes they're just kind of neutral things. Like, sometimes headmates are easily triggered out by things like songs or their favorite color. So, for example, the one on the left could easily have been, I haven't seen these clips, obviously, I've seen the one on the left, could easily have been they felt a switch coming on, set up the camera, because it doesn't take that long to do it, and then switched. In the center one, it says 3 switches from our live, meaning that the switches could have been completely unplanned on live, and they just took the clips. And then the planned switch thing, again, that is a thing that people do. It's not that rare. It's rarer in people who just learned their system and who have not, received any sort of treatment for dissociative issues, or who haven't begun working through that on their own, but it's a thing that you can learn how to do, and learning how to do so is actually really important for a lot of people to live functionally and safely as a system.
Alters tend to be subtle in presentation in most cases, and people with DID are often covert with their diagnosis and attempt to hide that part of themselves to keep themselves safe.
I do want to note, though, that a lot of the stuff with the covert presentation, it is true that most adults with DID will tend to present pretty covert. But I think it's very much underestimated how much culture changes and how much the changes in culture affect how people present with different mental health conditions. For example, people with autism, adults with autism tend to be more reserved, but young people with autism tend to be much less reserved now, in part due to the autism acceptance movement, to the visibility of autistic people. the normalization of behaving and looking weirdly. I mean, like, if I grew up autistic, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't look the way I do and dress the way I do and wear giant cat eye glasses, and stuff because I wouldn't have had so much exposure to other autistic people and the ability to like feel comfortable as myself, and looking weird. And a lot of what TikTok does for a lot of people with different mental health conditions and neurodivergencies and the like is it, normalizes presenting as a thing. It normalizes showing that you have a condition and acting like you have something and being proud of it, and showing other people it. And TikTok has done a lot, of harm in that a lot of people, because of TikTok, believe false things about whether or not they need to have DID to be plural, or knowing how much to keep private or oversharing trauma and the like. Like, that is a problem. But it's also worth noting that, like, people tend to be less shameful and covert about their experiences with mental health when they're exposed to other people not feeling ashamed of being mentally ill, and that is a good thing. And that happens across a ton of diagnoses. It's not just DID, it happens across the schizophrenia spectrum, across psychotic disorders, other dissociative disorders, mood disorders. I mean, you know, we're all annoyed by like the kind of depression and anxiety like sort of surge where people were talking about how normal people with anxiety and depression are, and it's like, and kind of like the quote unquote glamorization of those, and the idea of those being the normal mental illnesses, then pushing out all the other mental illnesses is weird. But that's worth noting. People with depression and anxiety, until very recently, usually wouldn't tell anyone. They wouldn't show anyone. They would lock themselves in closets when they were having panic attacks. They wouldn't talk about it. They certainly weren't getting tattoos about it. Whereas, like, for example, now I have a semicolon tattoo, and so do thousands of other people. This is the effect of destigmatization and pride in the things that make you different, in your neurodiversity, and that's good. We want to fight shame culture. We want to fight shame and diagnoses. We want to fight the feelings of shame that have been plaguing people with DID and DID-like symptoms since the dawn of time, since we've been having exorcisms performed on us. Like, it's good.
I don't know, how do we switch so quickly? Oh, we almost glitched. Yeah, I felt that.
Yeah, okay, hi, that's a thing that can happen. They were pretty clearly making a joke there, I think. But the way we do it is by being co-conscious, the word he misdefined earlier in the video. And because we've, lived as self-awarely plural for at least 2 years, probably more, probably 3 years actually, we've learned to switch over control pretty easily, to let each other talk pretty easily, especially me and Crow. Because especially before we were openly plural, me and Crow would take over, well, me and the person who preceded current Crow, would take over each other's conversations partway through. It's just kind of like a convenience thing.
DID TikTok might tell you that very few are faking it, or at least no more than you might find on social media in general.
Yes.
Rather, because TikTok provides a safe haven and a community space for people with DID who have historically felt isolated and like they needed to keep their issues under wraps, it allows for more expressive, creative, outward-facing displays of DID that, don't match clinical presentation. I mean, after all, how you present yourself online can be very different from how you are in your everyday life. I mean, in my life, I can hardly string 2 sentences together, but you only see a polished presentation. So, in other words, while the videos on TikTok may not be the typical clinical presentation, it's not meant to be. It's entertainment, not reality. In my personal opinion, the rise of DID diagnoses is a mix of these 2 factors. Even as far back as Sybil, I think popular media increases the visibility of the symptoms associated with DID, and then leads to more people getting help who genuinely struggle with the issue. Having a resource of information about DID on a platform that kids actually use could significantly raise awareness, and therefore, it's important and valuable. A lot of these people who self-diagnose likely have a similar story. They feel like things in their mind aren't right. They don't have the ability to seek a professional diagnosis. And so they find labels and communities that seem to match their experiences. But I also think there are many cases of misdiagnosis and people imitating the disorder due to that social influence. Not everyone on TikTok is being honest or accurate about having DID. And I know this for certain because I've seen confessions by TikTok creators and YouTubers and regular folks on Reddit who admit to faking DID for attention.
Okay, so sort of, but this is actually it's actually a really well known and well documented phenomenon in people with DID or people who believe they had DID. Basically, for them to claim that they come out and claim that they faked DID. And while there are definitely cases of people faking and then deciding to confess later, there are also many documented cases of, actually, in the case of Shirley Mason, in the case of Sybil, there is literally a scene in Sybil about this, where people who do have DID will try to like role play out their alters to prove that they're faking, to prove that they don't actually have DID. It's also worth noting that the majority of these screenshots are from Fake Disorders Cringe, and especially former Faker Friday. Fake Disorder Cringe is an extremely abusive subreddit that's primarily used to target and harass young people with DID and autism. It has contributed to massive harassment campaigns. It has contributed to the suicides of people. So using it as a source for the reality of faking DID is gross.
But it's worth acknowledging that even in most of these cases, these people are still struggling with an aspect of their mental health, just not DID.
Yes. Okay.
But
here we go.
even though that does happen, even if there were more people who falsely believe that they have DID than people who actually have it, that doesn't give anyone permission to go onto TikTok and start fake claiming. I certainly can't diagnose
Thank
someone or tell
God.
what's legit or not based on a 3-minute video. And I don't think it's particularly productive to try to invalidate others in general. We don't know their lives, so please don't bother these people. Now, some people might wonder, what do you care? You know, what's the problem with having some people think that they have DID? They're not hurting anyone. But that might actually not be true. To argue in the opposite direction, misdiagnosis can be a big issue because on an individual level, it can lead to ineffective or even harmful treatment. And on a broader scale, in situations where dissociative identity disorder is imitated or portrayed as a mere personality quirk, it spreads misinformation and contributes to sensationalism on social media, which delegitimizes DID and makes people less likely to take it seriously.
Okay, so I have beef with this. I have two main beefs with this. I forgot what he said. Hold on.
Disorder is imitated or portrayed as a mere...
Oh, right. Okay. I remember what I was going to say. Okay. Beef number one. Self-misdiagnosis does not carry any risk of ineffective treatments or whatever. It carries some risk of not seeking treatment, but self-misdiagnosis is actually much less risky than professional misdiagnosis because you can't prescribe yourself drugs. Professional misdiagnosis has been documented and like just ask anyone who's experienced a misdiagnosis, has caused way more harm than inaccurate self-diagnosis ever has in someone. So that's number one. And then number two, it is kind of just bad to blame people for the sensationalization of their own disorder. It is bad to blame people who are experiencing a disorder for not conveying it properly enough and for people not taking them seriously and not believing them. Members of a community and marginalized people are never responsible for other people's decision to disrespect them. If you want to know about people with DID, if you want to be better, if you want to try to see if you need to take them seriously, you are fully capable of learning from a ton of reputable sources without that much effort even. Not respecting anyone with DID based on TikTok is a choice. It's a choice you make, and it's not any random teenager claiming to have DID's fault that people make that choice.
So the risk is that the fad element further marginalizes folks who are actually living with DID while doing a disservice to the people who think that they have DID but might have another disorder who are not being properly treated.
Okay, here's the other thing though, is that people who are right about having DID can be wrong about DID. Most, I would say, well-known DID YouTubers have at least been a little wrong about DID in the past, if not extremely wrong about DID. And no one's saying, well, no one who knows what they're talking about is saying that they don't have DID. You're capable of being wrong about disorders that you do actually have.
I know I've primarily focused on TikTok, but YouTube plays a role in this too, though to a slightly different audience.
Me?
It really shows the power that these platforms have, particularly in shaping public perception. So if you, like me, have been looking for something different and a way to break out of that machine-fed dumpster fire,
Oh, it's
then I think
Nebula.
you should check out my streaming platform,
Thank you.
Nebula.
Hey!
The whole point of
Nebula
Nebula is to give
segue.
creators like
Woo!
me a space to experiment
Let's go.
and explore
Let's
without
go.
worrying about
This video is sponsored by
algorithms or
Nebula.
being
Let's go.
demonetized.
Let's
It's
go.
chock full of exclusive videos from FD Signifier, not just. You see, in addition to the debate about whether dissociative identity disorder is caused by trauma or if it's caused by social influences coming from media or mental health professionals, the other debate is about whether dissociative identity disorder is a valid psychiatric disorder at all. And the argument being made is that the symptoms can be better explained by other conditions. I'm going to be very upfront and say that I tend this direction. One reason for that is that I've never personally seen a single case of DID in over a decade of practice.
What did I tell you? I told you, he's not a DID specialist. Okay.
And as far as I'm aware, my colleagues have never diagnosed anyone with DID. And this is despite working with populations who experience a lot of trauma, especially childhood trauma. Trauma is one of my specialties.
Right, but not dissociation. And people who realize they have a dissociative disorder... Well, first, a lot of people realize they have dissociative disorders while in therapy and do not tell their therapists. Or they realize they're plural within therapy and decide not to tell their therapists. I realized I was plural months before I told any therapist, and I believe I was seeing 2 different therapists at the time. No, I was seeing one therapist, and then I started seeing a new therapist, and I told neither of them. Just because it wasn't their specialty and I didn't know how they were going to react and if they were going to stop believing me on my mental health issues. Generally, people who believe they have DID will seek out dissociative specialists, because if you're not a dissociative specialist, you probably don't know what DID even looks like.
So you'd think that I would have run into it by now, because I've certainly run into many other disorders that, at least according to population statistics, are far more rare. That said, I'm just one dude, and my anecdotal data means very little. But beyond my own personal experience, there is data that shows high comorbidity or overlap with other mental health diagnoses. For example, depending on the research that you look at, it's estimated that anywhere from 80 to 100% of individuals diagnosed with DID also meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder.
80 to 100%, I'd say, debatable. I mean, like, I'd say 80 to 99% even, I believe. But there are definitely a lot of people with DID who do not have PTSD. Like, they exist and they've spoken about it. So saying that everyone with DID meets the PTSD criteria is a bit...
64 to 70% meet criteria for borderline personality disorder. To me, that's an amazing degree of overlap.
Because I'm cursed or whatever, our phone ran out of storage right as we were finishing up recording. So we're going to be doing the rest of the video from this angle on our iPad.
Or overlap with other mental health diagnoses. For example, depending on the research that you look at, it's estimated that anywhere from 80 to 100% of individuals for borderline personality disorder. To me, that's an amazing degree of overlap, particularly with PTSD, and particularly with borderline personality disorder, considering it's no more common than DID. Borderline personality disorder shares many of the same traits, including mood swings, identity diffusion, a lack of a stable identity over time, dissociation, difficulty with self-image, and the suspected cause being a history of childhood trauma.
Okay, so we have borderline personality disorder, and by we, I mean most people in my system, including generally our previous hosts have. I have it, and TW also has it. We say we individually have it. Well, we have a video on it, but we say we individually have it because we do have our own personalities, and that gives those personalities a potential to be disordered. There are some notable differences between borderline and dissociative identity disorder. For example, it is not normal in borderline personality disorder for your instability in identity to result in identities that talk to each other, that have different levels of sentience, and that have different levels of memory loss. So, it's a notable difference, obviously, when two disorders are believed to come mostly from childhood trauma and result in identity diffusion and the like. Yeah, of course, they're going to be comorbid a lot of the time, but that does not invalidate one diagnosis over the other. You could make similar points for ADHD versus autism.
The main difference seems to be amnesia, since that's not a specified marker of borderline personality
That is not the
disorder.
only difference.
Though many people with BPD report gaps in memory while dissociating. And if you look at the common
That's most people with dissociative episodes of any kind.
symptoms of PTSD, derealization, depersonalization, mood swings, intrusive memories, avoidance, amnesia, impaired functioning. What that leaves unaddressed is the disrupted identity marked by two or more distinct personality states. But
Oh,
imagine,
no.
if you will, you're a mental health professional and you start working with a veteran.
Oh, he's about
And
to.
this veteran shares stories of experiencing intense stress and triggers of traumatic memories that lead them to black out. But then later on, they're informed that during these episodes, they were shouting orders and reaching for a radio and behaving erratically. In that scenario, you probably wouldn't call this DID and say that they switched to their soldier alter. Instead, you diagnose them with PTSD with dissociative symptoms. If you look at
Right, with dissociative symptoms, as in that would be qualified as a flashback. Amnesia during flashbacks is pretty common, especially when you have that kind of flashback, as in total, complete flashbacks, that alter your behavior a bit. But the thing is, when you are experiencing a flashback like that, you're not actually engaging with the present per se. By definition, a flashback is kind of you flashing back to a place where you have been previously. People with DID do also have those kinds of flashbacks. I mean, they're not super common because they're not a super common kind of flashback in non-veterans, but
the wording is fairly subjective and broad. What
that's because it's the DSM.
constitutes a distinct identity state? How is that determined? People often use turn of phrases like, I don't feel like myself, or I was acting like a different person, or people can feel outside of their bodies or like they're a passenger in their own life due to derealization and depersonalization. Is that what we're talking about?
No.
Memory is also a subjective experience. There's a lot of wiggle room for interpretation, and we see a considerable range in experiences among the people living with DID. Of course, there's a great deal of subjectivity and broadness in many psychological diagnoses, but to illustrate what I mean, compare it to other diagnostic criteria, like mania in bipolar disorder. DID, as it stands right now, lacks specificity.
Okay, but mania and bipolar disorder, I mean, again, this guy is a mood disorder specialist. Mood disorders do generally have some pretty specific diagnostic traits. But if you compare dissociative identity disorder to, for example, schizotypal personality disorder is extremely vaguely defined, but we are not seeing this guy arguing that it doesn't exist. Because, it's less trendy for sure.
Now, there are totally reasonable counter-arguments to everything that I'm saying.
Like the ones I just made?
For example, it could be that therapists, such as myself, are actually the ones misdiagnosing due to not being able to recognize the subtle symptoms of dissociative identity disorder. It's often claimed by DID proponents that people in the mental health profession don't receive
Don't call them proponents.
enough training and education around dissociative disorders in general. And that
Correct.
further leads to significantly less research attention being put toward dissociative disorders,
Also correct.
which explains the lack of specificity and the open questions.
Yes.
Also, the therapies designed to treat DID, which often focus on fusing the various identities back into one cohesive whole, do seem to work. I don't want to give the impression
Yes, there are other therapies that also work that do not require fusion, but okay.
that this is so obvious, because it really is complex. But, in my professional opinion, for whatever that's worth, I believe that dissociative identity disorder should not be a distinct standalone diagnosis, but rather a new subtype of other disorders.
Whoop, there it is.
That might sound a little bit like splitting hairs, but if it were up to me, I would recommend reclassifying DID as post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative identity type, and borderline personality disorder with dissociative amnesia.
It's interesting that you're proposing that as a PTSD specialist who does not specialize in dissociation, and as a mood disorder specialist who does not specialize in dissociation. Borderline isn't a mood disorder, but it has massive comorbidity with mood disorders to the point that if you're regularly treating bipolar depression and anxiety, especially if you're a college counselor, you're going to be treating a lot of people with borderline. So it seems kind of like someone who is not familiar with DID splitting up DID into two diagnoses that they're more familiar with. But what do I know?
There's a saying that goes, all models are wrong, but some are useful. This proposal that
fair.
I'm putting forward, it's almost certainly wrong. But I believe that it would be more useful than the current diagnosis of DID. Why?
I think his model can be useful, for sure. More useful than the model of DID, especially given the fact that DID has been misrepresented and the models of DID have been misrepresented here. Doubtful.
Is this important? And why should you care? Categorizing mental illnesses can make them easier to understand, easier to treat, and easier to share information if we're speaking the same theoretical language. People with dissociative identity disorder might significantly benefit from the diagnosis being recategorized,
They might also benefit from the diagnosis period.
because it would help mental health professionals tailor treatments that are based on its common characteristics and etiology with other disorders.
They do that with the current diagnosis, by the way.
Almost certainly, the amount of research would likely increase into it, as it would have a more well-established theoretical foundation.
Also debatable. I wouldn't say it would have a better established foundation if you just made it into a kind of PTSD and borderline.
And it would also further reduce the stigma and misunderstanding that circled this condition.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that's a hilarious joke. It's like, yeah, you know how we reduce the stigma around this condition? We make it a subtype of borderline personality disorder. You know how we all hear the word borderline and think, no societal stigma there, we only have the utmost respect for people suffering from borderline personality disorder? You know how we treat people with borderline really well and stuff, and we, don't see them as any sensationalized portrayals ever, and, people aren't actually more likely to react negatively to hearing borderline than DID. How, when I tell people I'm borderline, their reaction is always much better than their reaction to me being plural, you know how that works? That's not how it works.
So those are my thoughts. If it wasn't obvious from the start, I want to be 100% clear that outside of the non-genuine cases, the people diagnosed with DID are experiencing symptoms of DID. Whether it belongs under another diagnosis or not, it's mostly a semantic argument. There might be some folks in the comments who think that I'm contributing to the problem and further stigmatizing DID. Know that that's not my intention, and your lived experiences are valid. In any case, thanks for listening to me ramble. I'd be curious to hear your own thoughts in the comments, particularly from those of you who are currently diagnosed with DID. And until next time, I'm Micah. Think about it.
Okay, so we're going to be looking into the docs a little. We're not going to be digging too deep into them because I don't feel like it, and I've probably read a lot of this stuff, but I want to see who they've spoken to specifically. Okay, here we are. So, first one. Not super familiar with Annalyn McCord, or Living Well with Schizophrenia, honestly. BBC Radio. Okay, it looks like people think this one's good, but I'm looking for... Oh, McLean Hospital. Okay, so McLean Hospital. I'm not saying anything about this interview or this podcast because, like, I'm sure Robert Oxnam is fine. But McLean Hospital has recently gotten into a ton of hot water with the DID community for a talk they did on fictitious DID, which basically accused, like, people of malingering it unethically and non-consensually took footage from multiple people with DID, including, diagnosed DID, and presented them as, like, evidence of people, like, advertising DID on TikTok as, like, a sign of faking and shit. So, I'm sure this video is great, but McLean Hospital is leaving a horrible taste in a lot of people with DID's mouth, as of late. This is Multiplicity and Me. So, this is, Multiplicity and Me. I told you. And of course, here we go, the Final Fusion thing. I'm not joining their Discord because I'm too tired. A lot of these I've read or skimmed, so I have mixed feelings on the source list, but it's okay. So, what are my final thoughts on this video? I think this video is definitely nowhere near as bad as the Spockter video I reacted to a while ago. Granted, that's not a super high bar, but this video is definitely a lot better about not framing anyone as malicious, which the Spockter video was bad at, not ridiculing children, not claiming that the experiences of plurality aren't, things that people live with. But it did go wrong in a few places, as you saw us react to. For one, I think that personal expertise was actually over-applied here, because his specialty is not in dissociative disorders to any extent. There's a gap in knowledge there, and I don't think that was accounted for enough. I mean, he did acknowledge that he has not treated a DID patient, but it was not made clear enough in the video, and I don't think most people watching it would have recognized that his specialties do not actually really apply necessarily to the conversation on DID. I mean, he has source list. That's the main expertise, actually, I think, that goes into this video, though, is that research, not necessarily his experience as a licensed psychotherapist. I do disagree with the way DID was suggested to be recategorized. There have been talks of recategorizing DID. If you look at our channel, actually, we've talked about reclassifying dissociative identity disorder as more of a spectrum disorder. That includes what we know as other specified dissociative disorder subtype number 1. This is, and I'm surprised he didn't mention it, but in the ICD, DID is actually split into a diagnosis and a subtype. It's split into dissociative identity disorder, which is very similar to its DSM American counterpart, and partial dissociative identity disorder, PDID, which is similar to what a lot of presentations of OSDD1 are. And I think that reclassification would be a lot more useful than reclassifying DID as a personality disorder subtype or a trauma disorder subtype, especially because there are people who do experience DID, who are diagnosed with DID, who do not have a history of trauma or who did not form it in response to trauma. I don't think that enough research was done into how plural people talk about this issue, because if there was more research done into how plural people talk about this issue, and especially the modern plural community, because Multiplicity and Me, Dissociative DID, Entropy, they're kind of like the old guard. Multiplicity and Me, for example, hasn't posted since they went through Final Fusion. There's a lot of active system YouTubers now who have thoughts on this, who were not mentioned. I mean, we don't have DID. We wouldn't have expected, and we aren't that big. We wouldn't have expected to see ourselves mentioned. But for example, the Alexandrite system do not have DID, but they have OSDD and have spoken on stuff like this. The Ring system haven't uploaded in a while, and they also have OSDD, not DID, but they have also discussed this. The Mage system has DID and has discussed DID as a diagnosis. This is just completely off the top of my head. And there's plenty more. I believe the Stronghold system has discussed it. They could have looked into I'm sure there were a number of talks at the Plural Positivity World Conference that they could have looked at. And if they did, I do think that a lot of the mistakes in this video would have been avoided. For example, the way that they defined personality states, the misuse of the word co-conscious, things that probably wouldn't have happened if they had someone with DID look over the script. So is this the worst video ever? Definitely not. Would I rather someone who's just learning about DID look at a different video than this one? Absolutely. I wouldn't want this video to be someone's first exposure. But it's not the worst it could be, and frankly, it's better than the work of some people who do have DID on YouTube. Again, bar is kind of low for that. There is some really bad content by people with DID on YouTube. Don't get it twisted. But you know, it could be much worse. I do think that effort was put into it. I think an attempt was made. And unlike Spoctor, I don't think that the Neurotransmissions channel is like hostile to people with DID or like beyond hope of redemption or whatever. So, you know, that's good, I guess. That's good. And I guess hi if Micah, or if your co-host, I forgot their name already. Micah, if you're watching this, or Ali if you are. First, hi, how'd you get here? Let me know down below. But I do appreciate the effort. I do very much appreciate the end. My reaction was, you know, a bit snarky. That's kind of how I react to stuff, especially because, you know, your research probably showed a lot of people talk to and about plural people very poorly. I wouldn't write off this channel as a whole. I'm sure that they have other good stuff, but I did not like this video very much. So that's my feedback. I'm gonna hand it over to TW to let Ver give their thoughts on it. Yeah, so I mostly agree with Crow's assessment. I mean, Crow is a nicer person than I am. Definitely the video was not as bad as Spoctor's video, which I'm not linking, and I don't think you should watch it. It's not even that fun to hate watch. If it was more fun, we'd work on re-editing the VOD. It's not worth it. But anyway, pretty solid attempt, at least. I would have appreciated a lot more transparency on professional expertise could have actually contributed to bias here. I do think that there's a lot of meaningful difference in DID and borderline that could have been explored that wasn't, which as a plural person without DID and with borderline was frustrating, especially because we do have a different dissociative disorder from DID. So yeah, thank you for watching to the end of the video. If you liked the video, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want to do. As we mentioned very early on, we have our own Discord server, which is where we got the idea for this video. You can click the link below. We have a Ko-Fi if you want to support us financially. And am I forgetting anything? I'm probably forgetting something. Oh, right. Happy New Year. Sorry we were gone for a while, but life happened. We're planning to try to make a year in review like the one we did last year, but yeah, we don't know if it's happening. So see you all around. Thanks for stopping by. Bye.